Hello, everyone, and welcome to RHEL Presents. Today, we'll be talking all about the RHEL Lifecycle. My name is Brian Smith, and I'll be hosting today as Eric is out of the office. And I'm also joined by Scott McBrien. Scott, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yeah, so today we are going to be talking all about the RHEL Lifecycle, all the various components and on how you can understand them and how you can make sure you're keeping your RHEL environment up to date and in a supported state. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with the RHEL lifecycle, right? So we have RHEL releases, major releases. This is things like RHEL 7, RHEL 8, and RHEL 9 that are supported for a 10-year life cycle plus an extended life phase. So let's talk a little bit about the how that 10-year life cycle works. So with RHEL 8 and RHEL 9, this is broken up into two main chunks. We have the full support phase, and then we have the maintenance support phase. The full support, this is where we're going to be introducing things like hardware enablement, new features, new functionality. This is where we have new minor releases coming through. And this is where we'll also be fixing Red Hat defined critical and important security errata and things like that. So that's the full support phase. After 5 years, we then transition into maintenance support. Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about maintenance support?
Yeah. So after that first 5 years, we transition into maintenance support. And during maintenance support, one should expect critical and important security errata. So if there is a critical and important rated CVE, and that is rated by the Red Hat vendor adjusted CVSS score, if that occurs, then you should expect Red Hat to update that software and provide an update for you. Generally, that is what you should expect during that phase. Now, there are a couple of high priority bugs that might sneak in there, but very rarely does that occur. So critical and important security errata, that's what should be landing there. And we used to call this maintenance phase 2. And I remember, can I tell a funny story?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So when RHEL 7 moved to maintenance phase 2, I was meeting with a customer and they said, thank goodness it's finally just stable. Because they wanted that like very low amount of change of critical and important security of errata only. So that's what happens during this phase.
Exactly. Yeah, and then so the full support and maintenance support, that's the 10 years. And as Scott mentioned, this used to be a little bit more complicated with RHEL 7. We had maintenance support 1, maintenance support 2, but it's been simplified now with RHEL 8 and RHEL 9, full support and maintenance support. After that 10 years, we then transition into, there's kind of two different options here. There's the extended life cycle support, or ELS, subscription. It's an add-on subscription you can buy. This provides an additional 4 years of extended support for RHEL 7, and 3 years is planned for RHEL 8 and RHEL 9 when they get to this stage of the life cycle. And during that ELS extended lifecycle support phase, this is where Red Hat may provide security fixes for Red Hat defined critical and important CVEs. And so one reason why we want to do this show today is we've had a lot of lifecycle events recently happen. One of them being RHEL 7 as of June 30th. I'm sorry. Yeah, June 30th, transition into this extended life phase, right? So if you purchase the ELS add-on subscription, you can continue to get those critical and important security updates for RHEL 7. It's important to note a couple of other little caveats about ELS. This is really intended for existing systems only. So this is not intended for new deployments. So if you already have RHEL 7 systems in your environment, this is a great fit. If you want to deploy new RHEL 7 systems, that's not supported during this ELS lifecycle phase. You definitely want to read up, all about ELS. for example, it's not available for all different architectures, but we have a lot of different resources you can go through and read about that. So that's the ELS add-on subscription. But there's also this extended life phase support as well. And what that is, so this is where RHEL 7 would be if you don't have the ELS subscription. So if you just had your normal 10 years of RHEL 7, you decided not to purchase ELS, you're now in the extended life phase and you're no longer receiving those security updates anymore. However, I think it's important to know, Scott and I talked about this earlier, it's important to note that you can still open support cases for RHEL 7, RHEL 6, and even going back to RHEL 5. And what you'll get is Red Hat support will be happy to help you in a in a reasonable support level manner. However, during that phase, they're not going to be able to provide updated packages, bug fixes, security errata, stuff like that. Scott, anything to add on that?
I would just point out, I threw it up here. You've got it on the bottom of each of these graphics. That we're pulling these graphics and the description of what these things are from the RHEL product lifecycle page. And that goes through like a lot of more fine-grained, nuanced description of what each of these things is. But so specifically, do I want to add something on for and extended life phase? Sure. So during extended life phase, you're still expected to hold a RHEL subscription on that machine. And that's what gives you access to the content and what gives you access to opening support cases and other stuff. And we will, even after the extended lifecycle support add-on terminates, right, so that's actually about to happen for RHEL 6. Once that is done, then you'll still be in extended life phase, so you can still run the machine, but the support is more limited when you call us and try to get assistance with it. And then, as Brian said several times, we will no longer be making packages for it. So you'll be accumulating CVEs and vulnerabilities on that machine, which is one of the reasons why Red Hat pushes so hard for people to upgrade from an out of maintenance release like RHEL 6 is. It's been out of maintenance and on that extended life phase with ELS for a while. But it's really important to get off of RHEL 6 onto something else because you're just going to be collecting these vulnerabilities and they're not going to get remediated.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to be running any operating system that's no longer receiving security updates. That's really asking for trouble down the road. So so basically to kind of recap here, if you do have RHEL 7 in the environment, here in a few weeks, RHEL 7 is at the end of that maintenance support phase. So we would highly recommend, either upgrade to RHEL 8. We've talked about upgrades before on the show. There's a process to upgrade from RHEL 7 to RHEL 8. Or if you need a little more time, definitely look into that extended lifecycle support subscription add-on and see if that would be a good fit for your environment. All right, cool. So this is kind of a really high level view, right? But we also have the minor releases. So Scott, do you want to walk us through how these minor releases work?
Absolutely. So starting with RHEL 8, Red Hat decided to do what we call the predictable release cadence. So it will come as a shock to no one to find out that people have things like application life cycles and hardware life cycles. And so, like, for example, here at Red Hat, we get refreshed laptops every 3 years. That is the hardware life cycle of the laptop fleet at Red Hat. And it's not unusual to have similar policies for things like servers in your data center. So what is that life cycle and how do you replace it? And how do you plan for maintenance for it? How do you budget for replacing it? And for a number of years, Red Hat didn't really publicly state when we released RHEL. And so that interjected some chaos into the system. So starting with RHEL 8, we decided that we were going to publicly have a predictable release cadence. So every 3 years, we will release a major release of RHEL. So in 2019, RHEL 8 came out. In 2022, RHEL 9 came out. And in 2025, RHEL 10 is going to come out, right? So we're going to have this 3-year major release cycle. And then the other piece of it is the update releases. So when did a minor release of RHEL come out? Starting with RHEL 8, roughly twice a year, about every 6 months-ish, we will release a minor release. And if you look at that lifecycle page on the Red Hat customer portal, you'll see a graphic like this one for RHEL 9, also for RHEL 8. And when we release RHEL 10 in mid-2025, you will see one of these for RHEL 10. And essentially, it's so that you can plan when are these update releases going to land, so that I can better decide what version of RHEL I should deploy. When do I need to replace things? So if I'm replacing the server hardware, maybe I should also look at replacing the OS and upgrade some other things as part of my normal maintenance that is already planned. And when we look at this, oh, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think like this release cadence is super amazing because, you know, just to emphasize like how it was before, like with RHEL 7, you had no idea when RHEL 7 was going to be released. I think it ended up being like it was like between 4 and 5 years after RHEL 6 that we finally shipped RHEL 7. But we really didn't communicate, you know, when that was going to be coming out. So it was really hard if you were in a, you know, like implementing a new project, deploying new servers. You really had no idea when to expect RHEL 7 to come out. So this predictable release cadence really allows you, as you're planning out your projects into the future, and you need to ensure you have the lifecycle to support that. You can use this predictable lifecycle cadence to select the version that's going to be most appropriate for whatever your implementation is going to be.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to point out, like, inside of those minor releases, there's 2 groupings of them. You'll see that some of them have a very short blue bar. Actually, all of them have a very short blue bar, but some of them have like a light blue and a greenish bar after it. So every even release, so again, this is looking at RHEL 9, so 9.0, 9.2, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, those are ones that we offer extended update support on. So that means that just like we were talking about with ELS at the end of a product's lifecycle, where we will make sure that we compile critical and important security ratas, we do that for dot releases as well, but only for these dot releases. So 9.0 until mid-2024, which is right about now, you could still be on 9.0 and still be receiving critical and important security updates. 9.2, you'll be able to pin yourself to 9.2 and still receive critical and important security updates until mid-2025 if you're using the extended update support add-on. And then the greenish one, it turns out that having up to 2 years for a minor release is sometimes not enough for people. So starting with RHEL 9, we offer something called enhanced extended update support. And that gets you up to 4 years on a specified minor release, getting those critical and important security errata. We also will provide that up to 4-year minor release pinning for update services for SAP solutions. So if you buy one of the SAP specific products from Red Hat, it will come with this kind of 4-year minor release pinning. All right, but you don't want to pin yourself to a minor release if, one, it is not an even number. So you don't want to pin yourself to 9.1 or 9.3 because at the end of the 6-month life cycle, that's it. We stop doing anything for it. You also don't want to pin yourself to a minor release if you don't also have the extended update support add-on, right? Because having the extended update support add-on is what allows you to access those critical and important security errata that are produced for that minor release. And Shantanu asked a really great question in chat. So let me pull it up here for us, Brian. Okay. So Shantanu's question is about like guaranteed to work on multiple releases. And I will recategorize his question a little bit. because really what Shantanu is asking is like, what's the recommended practice for me to compile an application and make sure that it works across minor releases of RHEL? So for our ISV, that's independent software vendor partners, we recommend that when one certifies, you certify against a major release. So if you're going through the ISV certification program with Red Hat, we would recommend that you certify your app for RHEL 9 or RHEL 8. That is not always the case. There are, for example, some ISVs that like to compile their own kernel modules that go into the RHEL kernel. And because minor releases have different kernels, they're not able to just kind of like take that kernel module with them because they have to compile it for each kernel they want to comply with. But generally, I think if you certify against the major, depending on what your app is, that's the recommended practice. If your app is more tied to specific technologies that may change between minor releases, then you'll have to make some changes. But we'd like you to certify against a major.
Yeah, and then Bob mentioned this in the chat as well, but we do have the RHEL application compatibility guide published out there. So if you search for that, you can find, and that has more information about basically how applications should be compatible across different RHEL releases. So check that out for more information. Yeah, and then yeah, the other question that was asked was, what's going on with 9.10? Why is 9.10 supported for so long here? Can you explain that, Scott?
Yeah. So 9.10 is the final minor release of RHEL 9. And so that's when it makes its transition from full support to maintenance support. And so the reason it's that like really long bar is because we're not going to make any more of them. And it's in that 5-year maintenance support window. So recently this happened with RHEL 8. RHEL 8.10 was recently released. That was the last minor release of RHEL 8. And that will be the version of RHEL 8 for the next 5 years. And so that's why you see that kind of long tail.
Yeah, so what you would expect to see is the .10 version would come out 5 years into the life cycle. So if I go back to slide here, so during the full support phase, this is where you're going to see 8.0 through 8.9 or 9.0 through 9.9. And then when you hit the maintenance support phase, that's where you have that .10, the final minor release for that major version. And that's going to be, that 5-year release, which is why you see the long line here that reflects with this 5-year maintenance support phase.
All right. Extended update support. I said that you want to have it if you're pinning yourself to a minor release. How do you know if you have it? So hopefully we have some time in the demo period and I can show you like what to look for. But it is an add-on. So just kind of like ELS, you can purchase extended update support. It is included with a couple of product SKUs. So depending on your architecture and your support level and a variety of other things, it may be there automatically, but you'll want to check rather than make an assumption.
Right. And then we also talked a little bit about the extended lifecycle support or ELS subscription that can add on additional time after this 10-year life cycle. And just to talk about that a little bit more, some of the use cases we frequently see customers have for that kind of, for the need to have that kind of subscription is they might need more time to plan their upgrade to the next major version. So if you're on RHEL 7, you might need another 6 months or a year to plan your upgrade to get onto RHEL 8. Or you might be in a situation where you're on older hardware running on RHEL 7 and perhaps that hardware is no longer compatible with RHEL 8 or RHEL 9. So there's a variety of use cases and reasons you might find yourself needing to have RHEL support past this 10 years, which is why we may make this extended lifecycle support add-on subscription available to customers.
And I will like to throw on one additional thing about the predictable release cadence. So many of us who have used RHEL for a long time are familiar with this kind of less predictable cadence. And what was happening was we were accumulating features until we had enough change that we thought it was worthwhile to do a major release. But because of that, every time we did a major release, there was this huge cataclysm of new things that happened. And that made doing things like adopting that new version incredibly painful. Because, like, oh, by the way, we now use systemd. Or, oh, by the way, we now ship Docker. Or virtualization, right? Like, this huge pile of new things and changes came in at major releases. But one of the other nice things about moving to the predictable release cadence is that we don't hold the releases to accumulate features.
Right.
Like, we know mid 2025, RHEL 10 is coming.
Right.
So whatever we can get done between the 3 years that we released RHEL 9 and the 3 years later when we release RHEL 10, that's what goes in there. And so as a result, I think that it's easier for us to move to newer versions than it was previously, because there's not this like huge mountain you have to scale for all the new changes and features. And that's also true for the minor releases, right? Because they're close together, there's relatively small amounts of change compared with the older model of releases where we do an update every 1 year to 18 months. Now we're doing it every 6 months,
Right.
which means that we're taking much smaller bites and much smaller changes for each of those 6 months.
Right. Yeah, I think between when RHEL 7 was released and RHEL 8 was released, it was almost 5 years. And so, like you're saying, there were 5 years of changes kind of, piled up there. And so RHEL 8 had a lot of new stuff. And then, obviously between RHEL 8 and RHEL 9, we were at the 3 year predictable release cadence. So there were much fewer of those changes because we were looking at 3 years versus 5 years. So.
All right, Shantanu asked one other question. Do all the extended support packages come the same path via CentOS Stream, except the embargo ones? And the answer to that is sort of, but not really. So what happens when we finish this minor release is we have a fork of that minor release that we maintain internally at Red Hat, right? What's been happening in CentOS Stream is they've been preparing for the next minor release. And so they're adding new features and updating software. But in the minor release extended update support stream, we need to keep things the same and only change critical and important security errata. So while those critical and important security errata will get closed and sent to a stream and will flow into the next version of RHEL, the actual like packages available for a minor release that is using extended update support is fixed, and it stays within the walls of Red Hat. While the changes that are being made to that software is public via CentOS Stream, it's not in the same package version and other things that is provided via extended update support.
Right. Right. Yeah, and then the next question asked is, if I'm using something like CentOS Stream 9, I'm getting the updates anyway, right? And I think that the important thing to understand is if you're on CentOS Stream 9 or even if you're on RHEL 9 and always upgrading to the latest minor release, you are getting the updates, but you're also getting new features, new functionality, hardware enablement. You're getting all of those additional changes. And so the extended update support is really for people who want the most minimal amount of change you can have. Like, you just want to have, basically security errata in your environment. You don't want to have new features. You don't want to have hardware enablement. You just want to have things stable. That's where EUS can be really helpful. And then the other common use case, like you were saying, we recommend certifying against the major release, but like you mentioned, some software vendors will, certify for a minor release, for example, 9.2. So if you have software certified for a minor release, you might need to stay on that for an extended amount of time until they certify for the next minor release. So that's another popular use case for EUS.
Yeah, and so the CentOS Stream, like you see that this description for minors for RHEL is stair steps, right? So like when the minor release comes out, we provide a bunch of updates when that occurs. We've been providing those updates all along through CentOS Stream, It's just not held until it's a block. It's just continually pushed out. And so there wouldn't be this stair step. It would just be a line that's like up and to the right for sent to a stream.
All right. So this is a lot of information, right? Like how are people supposed to keep track of all these dates, and when is RHEL 8 going to be going out of support, like RHEL 9, et cetera? How do you keep track of all of this?
Yeah, so on the bottom of the life cycle page, again, which Brian has linked here, I threw it up earlier in the lower third. Because of the predictable release cadence, we can tell you with absolute certainty when these dates are going to occur. And we can tell you that when it's initially released, right? So in mid 2025, there will be a new line on this table that's for RHEL 10 with all the dates of when things are going to happen to it. And so if you scroll down towards the bottom of our lifecycle page, you'll see this table. And so these are the dates. This is when it was released. This is when full support phase ends. This is when maintenance support ends. This is when end of maintenance support. I'm sorry, I already said that. When maintenance support ends. And then this is when the ELS add-on will end and you fall into extended life phase. And then also when there's extended life phase ends. So for older releases like RHEL 5 has a suspense date on when extended life phase ends. So, as we go along, there will be additional dates for that stuff also added.
Yeah, one thing to want to add as well, we recently introduced a feature if you're using Insight's image builder to build out your RHEL images. If you go in there and select RHEL 8, it'll actually bring up a little dynamic graph and show you the major release life cycle. And we did that to show you, if you select RHEL 8, it'll show you that RHEL 8 is basically now in the maintenance support phase, and it'll also show where RHEL 9 is on the life cycle, just to make it kind of easier to visualize where we are and help you decide if RHEL 8 or RHEL 9 would be more appropriate for what you're trying to do.
But Brian, wait, there's more life cycle.
Yeah, so this is the RHEL life cycle we've been talking about. We also have an application stream life cycle. So what application streams are, this is basically a way that we have to deliver multiple versions of applications to RHEL customers. And this is done so that we can make newer versions of applications available to you. So for example, Postgres database might be an example of one of these application streams where we wanted to be able to deliver newer versions. There's several different implementation methods that we use to provide this functionality. And a lot of people get confused with the implementation method and the concept. So we have the high-level app stream concept, and then we have the separate implementation methods on how we provide that. So the various ways that we provide these application streams, number one is modules, DNF modules. And what this is, it's a DNF technology that basically when you install something, you can specify what version you'd like to use. And I think, Scott, you're going to show us a demo here in a little bit of how this works. But basically, you can choose what version out of a list that are available. So those are modules. We also sometimes will have just regular RPM packages that have a version number in the package name, right? So you have the package and then the version number, right, all combined in the name. So that's another way we can do this. And then finally, there's also the concept of software collections, and that's another way we've historically provided these different versions of applications to customers. When we're talking about the life cycle, though, the thing that's most important to keep in mind if you're using application streams with any of those different implementation methods I talked about is that the application streams have their own unique life cycle. So we've talked about all these, the RHEL life cycle, the EUS, all that. The application streams are their own separate life cycle. So for example, if you have the Postgres application stream at version X, we have a separate page out there that lists out all the lifecycle information, and it'll tell you when that version will be supported through. And then with that information, you can then go ahead and plan ahead. And before that goes out of support, you could upgrade to the next version of that application stream for Postgres, for example, or whatever the application is you're working with, so that you can stay on a supported version. And then we'll also point out, in the past with RHEL 8, we heavily used the modules to provide these application streams. In RHEL 9, we still do have some modules, but it's kind of not as many as we saw in RHEL 8. And then if you go out and look at things like CentOS Stream 10, where the development for RHEL 10 is happening, you'll see that we're not shipping modules in CentOS Stream 10 right now. So that's a really good place to check to kind of to stay up to date on what might be coming with RHEL 10, so you can kind of get a sneak preview on what that might look like.
And Brian, I'm going to accuse you of burying the lead there. Application streams are to, well, let me roll back. So it used to be in like RHEL 6 world. Day one, we released RHEL 6, and all the software that was released for it, that's what you got. And so 10 years down the road, you still have the same version of Python. You still have the same version of Perl. God bless you if you use Perl. And so if you're a developer, you were not very enthused to work on a 10-year-old version of Python. And so for certain things, especially things that tend to evolve more rapidly, we want to provide updated versions of things to help those people continue to do their development on RHEL. And so an example would be Node.js. Node.js moves very rapidly. And so every release or two, minor release or two of RHEL, we'll throw in a new version of Node.js as an application stream. So if you're working with Node.js developers and they're like, oh, I need the latest Node.js, you're like, cool, I got you. There's the latest version of Node.js. But because Node.js evolves so rapidly, that's also why it has a different life cycle. Because at some point that like Node.js becomes so old that everyone has abandoned it.
Right.
And so that's why we have different life cycles for the different application streams based off of the speed at which the community moves, the speed at which we're putting out multiple versions. And so like longer lived application streams would be things like new Postgres versions. Right? Postgres is a pretty established community. It moves a lot slower. They support things for longer time frames. And so as a result, the application streams of those newer versions of Postgres also tend to survive longer.
Right. Yeah, and with RHEL 9, we kind of have the best of both worlds, really, because if you go to that application stream lifecycle page, you'll see that RHEL 9, we have a number of what we call full life application streams, which are supported over the full 10-year lifecycle. So, things like MariaDB or Nginx, stuff like that. We do have versions that if you just want to pick that version and stay on it for the 10 years, great, you have that option. But if you like you were saying, Scott, if you want to upgrade to newer versions as new features come out and whatnot, you have that option now with application streams where you can upgrade to a newer version if you'd like to. So it really just provides a lot more flexibility and just a lot more options for our customers to choose what version is going to be most appropriate for their environment.
So I think this was a joke question of can you use bootc on RHEL 7? But I'm going to go ahead and put it in here anyway, because you have to understand lifecycle to answer this question. So Brian, what lifecycle phase is RHEL 7 in?
Yeah, so RHEL 7 is in the last weeks of maintenance support.
So if you're in maintenance support, do we give you new shiny features?
Yeah. Maintenance support is really focused on security errata for those critical and important advisories. Yeah, no hardware enablement, no new features. So
right. So what lifecycle phase is RHEL 8 in?
Yeah, and it also just as of about a month ago is in maintenance support as well.
So no new features. Read my lips. No new features
Yeah,
in maintenance.
yeah, RHEL 9 is the only version of RHEL currently in full support right now. So that's where if you're looking for new features, new functionality, new hardware enablement, you want to be running RHEL 9 right now.
Yeah, and just to be like super transparent, image mode, which is based on Bootsy, is a tech preview technology. So it's not even GA'd or fully supported at this point. It is a tech preview technology, and therefore it's only in RHEL 9.4 as a tech preview. Tech preview is like use at your own hazard, because it's still under development.
Yeah, not recommended for production use, for sure. All right, cool. So we've talked a lot. Let's see a demo.
All right. So we started with or we ended with application streams. So why don't we take a look at application streams first? So if we do a DNS list on Ruby, there's the version of Ruby that I can install in this machine, 3.0.7. So I can just, DNF install Ruby. I'll throw on a -y so I don't have to answer questions about it. All right, so now that it's installed, if I do a Ruby -- version, right, that's the, oops, -- version would be what I want, but there it is, 3.07, right? That's the version I installed. But Ruby is one of those things where we want to provide updated runtimes throughout the lifespan of RHEL. And it turns out we've done this for Ruby already, twice for RHEL 9. And so if you wanted to see what additional versions of Ruby were available, they are distributed as modules for RHEL 9. So if we do a DNF module list, Ruby. So I currently installed 3.07, but 3.1 is available and 3.3 are available. So what if I want to go to Ruby 3.3? So with application streams, we offer you multiple versions of a thing, but you can only have one thing, usually. So in order to get Ruby 3.3, I'm going to remove the Ruby I've got, and I'm going to install the Ruby I want. So I'm going to do a DNF remove Ruby, whoops, -y. And then to install the Ruby I want, I'm going to do a DNF module install. Right, I have to tell it to install this modular content that's Ruby 3.3. And I want Ruby. And because there's two modules available, I have to tell it which one. I want Ruby version 3.3. And one of the reasons why we package it this way is in the past, when we allowed you to have as many different versions as you wanted, they would all be installed kind of in their own directory structure to keep them separate. And so if I do a Ruby -- version, right, I am indeed running Ruby 3.3, but in order to get Ruby 3.3, I had to remove Ruby 3.07, right? So that if somebody just uses user bin Ruby, there's only one on the machine.
Right.
This one, 3.3.1, right? So if somebody puts in their Ruby files, shebang, user bin Ruby, there's only one to choose from.
Right. Yeah,
Right, but that's the case. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to point out one little thing that you definitely want to be careful of and watch out for, especially if you're on RHEL 8. And that's, at the beginning, you just did the DNF install Ruby, right? And that'll work on RHEL 8, it'll work on RHEL 9. But what you're going to get when you do that is you're basically going to get the default version of the application stream, which is going to be the oldest version. So for example, if you did a DNF install Ruby on RHEL 8, you're going to get I think it's Ruby 2.6, which is currently out of support because that is the original version from several years ago. So if you are working with any of these applications that are implemented as modules, you definitely want to go through the procedure you just showed, where you can look at the modules and then pick what version you want and make sure it's going to be under support. And I just be careful with the DNF install without using the modules.
Yeah, and because of that nuance for RHEL 8, for RHEL 9 we made some slightly different decisions. For RHEL 9, generally the initial versions released with RHEL 9 is the long-term supported package that you can use for the lifespan, the 10 years of RHEL 9. There are a few exceptions like Node.js and some of the other fast-moving things, but generally that's the case. And the modules are then additional versions that may have a different support date. So that's why it's important to know what's on that application stream lifecycle page that Brian was talking about earlier, so that you can actually match up, like, this is the version I have, this is when I need to get off of it. All right, so I also want to show you a not modular implemented application stream. So our friends Python. Okay, so Python 3, right? It's like the second package list there, 3.9.18. And then if we go a little bit further, past all the libraries and whatnots, we get right here, Python 3.11. And if we go a little bit further past all the library and whatnots for Python 3.11, Python 3.12, right there. All right, but you'll notice that in the name of the package is this embedded version number. And it turns out when we install this package, it's going to create a directory structure that has that version number in it. And what this allows us to do is isolate Python 3.11 from Python 3.12 from Python 3.9. Which is kind of cool because I can run multiple versions of things, but it's also a giant pain because now I have to manage multiple versions of things. And let me go ahead and install a couple of these. So I'm going to install both Python 3 and Python 3.12. All right, so notice that I now have Python, Python 3, Python 3.12, Python 3.9. And if we look at user bin, actually, we'll just do this, PyStar. So if I use shebang user bin Python, well, notice that's a symlink. So it goes to Python 3, which is really Python 3.9. So if I want Python 3.12, I actually have to use shebang user bin Python 3.12 to start my Python application so it knows which correct version I want to base it off of. Which means the developers who are using Python have to know that there are multiple versions and which version they want, and remember to put it in their applications. Now, because the user bin Python and user bin Python 3 are symbolic links, turns out they're managed by the alternative subsystem. So as a systems administrator, you could monkey with where those links point to make them point to a different default version of Python. However, it turns out there's a whole bunch of Red Hat apps that use Python too, or so I should say Python as well. So when you mess with those symbolic links, you're redirecting the Python used by a whole bunch of system applications to a different version of Python as well, which can lead to weird things. So that's why we simplified with modules to let you have only one thing, because now you don't have to deal with all this vagary of like, well, what if I use this or that? Or how do I keep track of this version or that version? There's only one version installed, so there's only one thing, right? But if you want to do multiples, a few of them are packaged as multiples. I think GCC toolset is another one of these where it's packaged as multiple versions that you can have installed in parallel, but then you get to manage the parallelism. All right, Brian, any final words of wisdom, or are we ready to do another demo?
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, let's keep going.
All right. So the other demo I've got is for extended update support, or EUS. So I said, hey, you guys probably want to know whether you have EUS or not, right? So what we can do is subscription manager. I think it's list repos. Let me just double check here. Maybe it's DNF. Hold on. That one. Ah. So what happens when I don't write things down, Brian?
Is it? Yeah, I was gonna say, is it repo list? I think I think it might be all one word. Repo list. Yeah.
All right, so that's what I have installed, but I want all of them.
Oh.
Oops, didn't dash. Ah, too many dashes. There we go. All right, so this is all the repositories that are in my account based off of my subscriptions that I have with Red Hat. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm just going to grep for EUS. All right, so this is a RHEL 9 system, and you can see that there's a RHEL 9 AppStream EUS and there's a RHEL 9 Base OS EUS, right, which is this one and this one. So my subscriptions that I have from Red Hat allow for me to use extended update support. And this could be because I bought the add-on. It could be because it's included in one of the subscriptions that I bought. So you're ready to use EUS. Well, what does that look like? Well, first off, hey, Brian, what is the current version of RHEL 9?
So we just released RHEL 9.4 about a month
Yeah.
ago.
So let me show you what I'm working with. So this is it's a RHEL 9.4 machine. That's not going to work so good. 1 second. Since it's currently the version of RHEL, that is not going to help me show you how to pin yourself to a version. So I'm going to have to start up an older RHEL box. 1 moment.
So what you're saying is basically 9.4 is our current release. We've just released 9.4 about a month ago. We're still in its first 6 months of support. So the EUS is not available for 9.4 until 9.5's come out, basically.
Well, so you can subscribe yourself to EUS, but it's not going to give you that thing that you want, which is only critical and important errata. You actually get all the 9.4
Right.
if you subscribe to EUS today.
Right.
So what I was hoping to do is I have a 9.0 box. And so I'm starting that up now. And we're going to take this 9.0 box and we're just going to say, hey, if I did a DNF update, what would happen? So if I do a DNF update, it's going to try and update this 9.0 box to 9.4 because that's the most current. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to subscribe the machine to EUS repos. And then we're going to tell it that we only want it to be on 9.2.
Okay.
And then we're going to apply the updates to get our machine up to 9.2.
Sounds good. And while you're booting that up, we had Bob Davis in the chat point out that you can now use EUS on RHEL 9 Workstation, which I did not know about. That's really cool.
Well, for RHEL 8 and later, we kind of have the same package set for all of RHEL.
Right.
So those same packages operate for RHEL Workstation too. And while I am here, waiting for my machine to start, I'm going to share the link to a lab in case our audience would like to try it for themselves. So this is essentially what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this lab, although I've already got the commands I want to demo kind of off to the side. But this will walk you through basically what I'm about to tell you if you want to try it yourself. And so earlier we were talking about certifying applications on major releases and stuff. If you are a independent software vendor and you feel the need to certify yourself or support a specific minor release of RHEL, an EUS release is what I would choose.
For sure, definitely.
Yeah, because then you could tell your customers, oh, you want RHEL 9.2 with the extended update support add-on so that you can continue to get those critical and important security errata. And if you're not going to certify your application for a while, that'll give your customers a while to stay on that minor release version.
Right.
With RHEL
Right.
9, it gets even sweeter because you can also get the enhanced extended update support add-on, which gives you up to 4 years
Yeah.
of the right. So you can pin on that minor release and stick on it for a long time. All right. So let me try this again. My new machine. Did I do the right thing? All right, here we go. 9.0.
Nice. Nice.
I mean, it's a live demo, Brian. What could possibly go wrong? All right, so we're on 9.0. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to detach the system from the default repositories. All right. So currently, this machine is attached to the RHEL 9 base OS RPMs repository and the RHEL 9 AppStream RPMs repository. And that's why if I did a DNF update, it would try to pull me up to the latest and greatest RHEL, because that's what's in these repos, all the latest packages for RHEL. And instead, what I need to do is subscribe myself to the EUS versions of this package set. All right. So I disabled for base OS. Let me see if I can just do it by memory. AppStream. And then what we're going to do is resubscribe the system to the EUS versions of these repositories. All right. And so instead of doing it as 2 separate commands, I'm just going to do it as one with multiple enables. But you can see we're base OS, EUS, and AppStream EUS. Right? That's what we're subscribing to. Now, it turns out this is the same. No matter what minor release of RHEL 9 we're on, we're going to subscribe it to these 2 repositories because there's one other critical piece of data. What minor release are we trying to attach ourselves to?
Right.
Right. So if we do a subscription manager release list, these are the minor releases that are out there. So I said we're going to pin ourselves to 9.2. So we're going to do a subscription manager release set equal 9.2. And because we've set this piece of metadata that I'm interested in sticking myself on 9.2, whenever my machine calls into the EUS repositories, Subscription Manager will actually like figure out which RPMs in the repository are appropriate for 9.2. So I can do a DNF update. And this is going to pull my RHEL 9.0 box up to RHEL 9.2. And it'll be a little bit because there's like a bunch of packages there. I'm sorry, Brian, we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So if you had done the DNF update before you enable those EUS repos, this would take you up to 9.4 instead of 9.2, right?
Yeah, and not just 9.4, but 9.4 plus whatever additional updates have been released for 9.4 up to today.
Yeah, because basically without EUS, without the EUS repos, and without pinning your release like you did, anytime you run DNF update, you're basically getting the latest and greatest for that major version of RHEL, whatever that is. So.
Exactly. I will tell you that I had done a download only on my other box that was the wrong version. I was thinking ahead on the wrong version. All right, but we can look at like the RPMs that were downloaded, and you can see that they all have that like not all of them, but a lot of them have the EL9_2 in them.
Right.
So we know they're RHEL 9.2 era packages.
Right.
That's probably going to beg a question from the audience of like, well, how come not all the ones have 9.2 or 9_2? And it turns out that the engineering teams that manage the different packages each have their own mechanism for tracking the versions of the packages. So some of them use, you can see like Perl Overload there has just EL9 because they don't track minor releases in that subsystem team.
Right.
Some of them have 9_2, or you can see like, well, that's Google Cloud. That doesn't matter. Others like the kernel, they have a really finite, or not finite, a really enhanced way that they track versioning. And so there's like 87 minor, sub-minor, sub-minor
Right.
in their version string. But each team that manages their packages kind of chooses how they're going to manage the release value with their packages. And many of them choose the minor that goes with it, like 9_2, but not all.
Right.
So while we're waiting, Brian, what's the next RHEL Presents that we're doing?
Yeah, so in 2 weeks, we are going to have Ubico on to talk about password authentication with RHEL using Ubico. So definitely excited about that one. And what do you have going on Into the Terminal on Friday?
Yeah, so this week we'll be doing a Podman tutorial.
Oh, nice.
Introduction to Podman. And then I think we're going to start doing some troubleshooting ones in future weeks.
Oh,
we're going to
cool.
kind of change our methodology for troubleshooting. So if you watch troubleshooting videos on YouTube, a lot of times they're like, oh, edit this file. Oh, run this command. But how do you know to edit that file or run that command? So we're going to start off with kind of like, this is what a transaction of this thing looks like.
Right.
And so if you're having problems, it has to be in this workflow.
Right.
And then you run commands to figure out where in that workflow you're broken. And then you can make good choices because you don't just want to like, oh, my networking is not working. Let me edit my DNS settings. Like, how do you know that that's going to fix it or not fix it?
Yeah, there's definitely an art to troubleshooting, and that sounds like a really exciting, series of shows to explain, how to do that. Pass on all that knowledge that you have.
Yeah, and I think one of the guys I used to work with was an operations wizard, and he would always get frustrated that people will always jump to the most common causes. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, just IF down your interface and IF up it again. It's like, but how do you know?
Yeah.
Or the infamous turn it off and on again.
Are you going to provide any tips on when you're on call and you get woken up at like 3 a.m, how to troubleshoot
with bleary eyes?
Yeah, exactly. Because
Uh,
that's what I remember from my sysadmin days.
yeah. Well, actually, last week we were talking about scripting, and I wrote a script that my ops wizard friend also like insisted we use, which was to do a backup of any file before you touched it. Because that way, if you were like hacking around on a file trying to fix something, if it turns out your changes were ineffective or whatever, you didn't have to remember what you did in order to undo them. You could just restore the backup that you had made before you started.
Yeah, that's really important because especially when you're under a lot of pressure to get the system back up and running, if you have an outage, a lot of people, just like you're saying, like just start trying anything and everything, and you can really, get your system in an inconsistent state and cause other unrelated problems that then you have to go back and figure out later. So that's a really good tip right there.
Yeah. Upgrading 9.2 takes a long time, Brian.
Should have gone with 9.0.
Well, but the problem is 9.0 is like dangerously close to being out of EUS.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But you're right. I was being too smart for my own good. I should have stuck with 9.0. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to finish up this update. What we'll see is there's no packages left for it. But then I'll change my version pin to like 9.4.
Right.
And then we'll see there's a bunch of updates available for 9.4 that would drag me up to 9.4, which is not really what I want. But we won't apply the updates. We'll just look at them.
Yeah, and then another little troubleshooting tip that I think is pretty cool is with the web console. A while ago, we introduced a lot of the performance monitoring stuff in there, and the web console will now identify like when there's a resource usage spike, like high CPU, high memory, and it'll actually show you the log entries on the system that occurred around the time of that resource spike. So it's a really cool way. Like there was a CPU spike. Go to web console, it'll show you those log entries that occurred around then, which can be a good. It's not always the issue, right? A lot of times it isn't, but it's a good starting point to see what might have been going on in the system around the time of that performance spike. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and I actually use that when doing diagnosis, right? Because if we have a problem overnight and we come in the next day and it's trying to figure out what was happening overnight, oftentimes there will be those kind of indicators in Web Console that's easy to pluck out, and it tells you the time that those things happened. And so I can then use my friend grep with that time and look at the logs, just kind of like see what was logging during that time to help identify what might be the problem. Man, I think
we're getting close here. Oh, all right.
Thankfully. All right. So first off, Red Hat release. Yay, we're on 9.2. That's what we wanted, right?
Yep.
All right. And if we do a DNF update again,
shouldn't be anything, right?
Nothing to do, because we're already up to 9.2, and we're up to 9.2 plus any critical and important security routed that have been released in the last year, right? Because 9.2 is no longer active and hasn't been active for 6 months.
That's taken a while, huh?
After internet squirrels. I don't know, Brian. You want to just take my word for it?
Yeah, I trust you, Scott. So.
All right. Well, apparently we're going to be watching it anyway. All right.
There we go.
Let me just make sure. Good, it's not there. All right, so if I set it to 9.4. And do a DNF update. There we go. We're going to take out the -y. So what it should come back with is like a whole bunch of additional packages I need. But it may be a while. Do we want to wait? I don't know that we want to wait.
I think we can certainly all take your word for this. So what you're going to see is you're going to see, like you said, the big long list updates, and what you're going to get is all the 9.4 content. After this runs, you can see Red Hat release again, and you're going to be at 9.4 at that point. And what's cool is you're going to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to be version locked into 9.4. So even when 9.5 comes out, this system is now locked at 9.4 until you go in and tell it otherwise. Is that right?
Yes, but it's not just locked at 9.4 because there actually is like a DNF version lock that will lock you at a version.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't ever do that.
Right.
What you are is you're locked at 9.4 plus any critical and important security errata that come up.
Exactly.
If you do a version lock using DNF version lock, you'll be version locked at the what came out with 9.4 while 9.4 was the active minor release. And then this is where it gets really terrible. 9.5 comes out. And so here you are in your 9.4 box that's version locked. And you're going, DNF update. And it's like, no updates available. You're like, cool, I'm sweet. And then like DNF update. It's like, no updates available. And you're like, oh, that's great. I'm up to date. And then 3 years from now, you go DNF update. And it's like, no updates available. And you're like, oh, it's been 4 years since I've had an update. I must be awesome. But no, you're not awesome. You version locked yourself using DNF version lock.
Don't do that.
So using a subscription manager to set your version,
right?
Subscribed to EUS. That's what you want. That's me.
Yep, exactly. Very good. All right. Any other final thoughts, Scott, before we wrap up?
Not for me, Brian. Thank you for having me today. It was great to step in for Eric, who unfortunately had some family stuff to attend to, but always nice working with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. Be sure to like the episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again. Until next time in 2 weeks when we have Yubico on behalf of myself, Scott, and the rest of the RHEL team, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Take care.